Have you ever been told you don't belong just because of how you look or where you come from? Imagine sitting in first class, holding a valid ticket, yet being asked to leave. Not because of anything you did, but because someone assumed you weren't worthy of that seat. That's exactly what happened to Christopher Langston, a young black CEO who carried not just a boarding pass, but a lifetime of resilience and sacrifice. In that moment, he had a choice to walk away quietly, or to stand his ground not just for himself, but for everyone who has ever been told they were out of place. What would you have done? Would you shrink under the weight of humiliation, or rise and claim the dignity that was always yours? This story is not just about an airline seat. It's about every moment in life when someone tried to push you out of your rightful place. And it asks a question we all must answer when your seat is challenged. Will you fight to keep it? Stay with us as we uncover a journey of injustice, courage, and redemption. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring stories that truly matter. Christopher Langston arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport just before sunrise. He had always preferred the earliest flights. The airport felt quieter, almost like a cathedral of steel and glass, filled with the soft hum of escalators and the faint smell of brewed coffee. For Christopher, mornings like this carried a sense of possibility, a new day, a fresh chapter. He rolled his black carry-on behind him, the same bag he had carried since graduate school. It wasn't fancy, but it was sturdy, like him. His tailored gray suit fit neatly, understated but professional. People glanced at him as he moved through the terminal. Some eyes softened with curiosity, others narrowed with assumptions. Christopher was used to that weight. It never left. At 36, he was already a CEO, the founder of MedCore AI, a healthcare technology company designing artificial intelligence systems to help hospitals predict and prevent medical emergencies. The flight today wasn't for vacation or leisure. It was for a closed-door meeting in Seattle with both federal regulators and major hospital executives. His technology was entering the next stage of nationwide adoption. Billions of dollars, and perhaps millions of lives, were on the line. Christopher approached the first-class counter to check in. The gate agent, a young man in his 20s, greeted him with a tired smile and scanned his boarding pass. The screen flashed green. Seat 1A, Mr. Langston, enjoy your flight. He thanked him, voice steady, calm. He'd worked hard for this seat, not the leather chair itself, but everything it symbolized. Years of late nights, coding, pitching investors, facing rejection after rejection. He had built a company in an industry that doubted people like him could ever lead. Every milestone felt like one more bus ride past the invisible barriers society placed before him. Christopher walked toward the gate. That's when he noticed them, the couple. The man was tall, silver hair swept neatly, his tailored navy suit carrying the sheen of old money. His wife wore a pearl necklace and a cream-colored blazer. Their posture screamed entitlement. They stood close to the boarding lane, their conversation halting as Christopher approached. The wife whispered something. The husband gave a short laugh, the kind meant to slice rather than warm. Christopher felt their eyes trace him, like a scanner searching for flaws. He kept walking, shoulders squared. Boarding began soon after. Christopher was among the first called. He stepped onto the jet bridge, the cool air pressing against his skin. Inside the cabin, the flight attendants were already directing passengers to their seats. Christopher found 1A, the first row, window side, a seat he had earned and a seat he had paid for at full fare. He placed his bag overhead, slid into the chair, and fastened the belt. He took out his notebook. Christopher never traveled without it. On the first page were the words his mother had once told him. Dignity isn't given. It's claimed. every day. As he adjusted the notebook on the tray table, a shadow loomed over him. It was Evelyn Grant, the lead flight attendant. Her smile was polite but strained. "Sir," she began, her tone controlled, "I need to verify your boarding pass again." Christopher looked up, calm. "Of course." He handed it over. Evelyn scanned it with her handheld device. The screen confirmed 1A, Christopher Langston. Still. Her brows pinched. She glanced at the couple standing in the aisle, waiting, whispering. The man crossed his arms. "This seat," Evelyn said carefully, "is usually reserved for premium passengers." "Are you sure?" Before she could finish, Christopher's voice, low and even, cut through. "Yes, I am sure. And your scanner is sure too." The husband stepped forward, voice sharp. "Look, there must be a mistake. Someone like him doesn't belong in 1A. The words didn't need translation. The venom wasn't subtle. A few nearby passengers turned their heads, some feigning indifference, others curious, some uncomfortable. Christopher inhaled slowly. He had lived this scene before on sidewalks, in boardrooms, in hotel lobbies. Every time, the script felt familiar. Doubt, dismissal, then the demand to prove himself. "I belong here," Christopher said, steady as stone. "My ticket is valid. My name is Langston. Seat 1A is mine." Evelyn shifted, caught between the scanner's truth and the passenger's prejudice. The husband's face flushed red. His voice rose. "If you don't move him, I'll call the captain myself." Christopher closed his notebook. He could feel the old anger stirring, the ache of years watching his mother ride 3 buses each way to clean offices where no one remembered her name. But anger wouldn't serve him now, not here. Instead, he leaned back, calm in the storm, and whispered the words only he could hear. "Dignity isn't given, it's claimed." The engines outside whirred to life. The plane hadn't moved yet. Neither had he. And in that silence, a story was about to unfold that no one on board would ever forget. The hum inside the cabin grew louder as more passengers boarded. The sound of overhead bins slamming shut mixed with the low chatter of travelers finding their places. Yet in the middle of all that motion, the air around seat 1A seemed frozen. Christopher sat still, his notebook resting on his lap while Evelyn Grant hovered nearby, torn between the flashing confirmation on her scanner and the searing pressure from the wealthy couple. Richard Whitfield's voice cut through again, sharp and commanding. "Miss Grant, I'm not sitting here until this misunderstanding is fixed. You know who I am. This is absurd." Christopher's gaze shifted toward Richard, his eyes calm but piercing. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. Years of practice had taught him that composure could be louder than shouting. "There's no misunderstanding," he said evenly. "The ticket is mine. The seat is mine." But Evelyn's professional smile faltered. She looked down the aisle toward the galley, where another attendant was already picking up the phone. Seconds later, the captain himself appeared, his uniform sharp, his face carved with the lines of a man who had seen hundreds of conflicts play out before takeoff. "Captain Harris," Richard said quickly, stepping forward as though the pilot was his personal fixer. "This gentleman is in the wrong seat. We've paid premium fares for decades. You can't seriously expect us to sit behind this." The pause before the last word carried the weight of centuries. Christopher's chest tightened. He felt the eyes of half the cabin now fixed on him, some curious, some judgmental, some sympathetic, but silent. He wondered how many of them recognized this moment for what it was not about tickets, but about belonging. Captain Harris held up his hand. "Mr. Whitfield, let me handle this." He turned to Evelyn. "Scanner verified." "Yes, Captain." Seat 1A, Christopher Langston. Then it's settled, Harris said firmly. Mr. Langston has the right seat. But Richard wasn't finished. His voice grew louder, echoing off the cabin walls. Captain, listen. If he doesn't move, I'll take this to the airline board. I know people. We all know this isn't about tickets. It's about standards. The cabin quieted. Passengers froze mid-motion, torn between politeness and the spectacle unfolding in front of them. A child asked his mother, "What's happening?" She hushed him quickly. Christopher felt the weight pressing harder now. He could move, end the conflict, avoid the scene. That would be the easy way. But it would also mean surrendering more than a seat. It would mean surrendering the dignity his mother had carried on 3 buses every day just so he could have a chance to sit here. "I won't move," Christopher said, his voice steady, low, but carrying to every corner of first class. Not because of pride, because this isn't about me alone. It's about every assumption that people like me don't belong in seats like this. I paid for this ticket. I earned this seat, and I will not surrender it to your prejudice. The silence that followed was heavier than any turbulence. Richard's wife gasped, clutching her pearls as though Christopher's calm resistance were an act of violence. "How dare you speak to us like that?" she hissed. Evelyn looked between them, her training unraveling in the face of raw human conflict. "Captain, maybe for the sake of peace." But Harris shook his head. Peace isn't bought by punishing the innocent. His words landed like a gavel. "Mr. Langston stays." The couple recoiled, shocked by the resistance. Yet still, Richard's voice rose again. "Then I refuse to fly. This plane doesn't leave until he's off." Christopher opened his notebook slowly, deliberately, and wrote a single line. Passengers craned their necks to see. Curious. The words were simple. Dignity isn't negotiable. He closed the notebook and met Richard's gaze. "Then it seems we both have conditions for takeoff." A murmur rippled through the cabin. A businessman in row 3 whispered to his seatmate. A young woman near the back of first class pulled out her phone, not openly filming, but holding it just low enough to capture the scene. The tension was now documented, preserved. Richard's face turned crimson. He opened his mouth to demand again, but before he could speak, the intercom buzzed. A voice from the cockpit announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're running final checks. Please take your seats so we can prepare for departure." The irony was sharp. Everyone needed to sit down so the flight could begin, but the very first seat had become ground zero of a larger war. Christopher leaned back, buckled in, and said nothing more. He knew silence could sometimes speak louder than words. Yet, inside, his heart raced. His palms were damp. His mind replayed images of his mother. Angela Langston, dragging herself off those buses, her hands raw from cleaning, her body aching, yet her spirit unbroken. She had told him over and over, "Never let them tell you where you don't belong." He remembered nights when she came home so late she fell asleep at the dinner table, whispering, "Someday, you'll sit in rooms I'll never see. Don't let them push you out of them." That memory steadied him now, like an anchor in stormy seas. Finally, Evelyn sighed, defeated. "Mr. Whitfield." "Mrs. Whitfield, please take your seats." The couple bristled but obeyed, sliding reluctantly into 1C and 1D directly across the aisle. The tension between them and Christopher was so thick it felt like a physical wall. As the last passengers boarded, whispers spread like wildfire, a man in seat 1A refusing to move, a wealthy couple fuming, a captain standing his ground. No one yet knew that this was only the beginning. Because soon the plane wouldn't just be about seats. It would be about survival. And the only person who could keep it airborne was the man they had tried to push out of 1A. The cabin settled into a restless quiet as the final boarding call echoed from the gate. Overhead, bin snapped shut. The smell of reheated coffee drifted through the aisle. Yet for Christopher, the air was heavy, pressing on his chest like a weight he knew too well. He sat in 1A, perfectly still, every muscle disciplined into calm. But his ears caught the whispers. Passengers 2 rows back murmured behind their hands. A teenager pretended to scroll on his phone while recording video. The story was already leaving the aircraft, carried into the digital world before the plane had even left the ground. Across the aisle, Richard Whitfield shifted in his seat, glaring openly. His wife leaned close, her voice sharp but low enough that only nearby passengers could hear. "This is humiliating. Do you see how he looks at us? Like we're equals. Evelyn should have moved him immediately." Christopher opened his notebook again, drawing slow lines across the page, more to steady his hands than to capture words. But eventually, letters appeared, deliberate and neat. Calm is strength. Dignity is armor, just as the cabin seemed to be settling. Evelyn reappeared, her shoes clicking against the floor. She leaned down toward Christopher, her voice low but audible to the surrounding rows. "Sir, I need to ask again, are you certain this is your seat? Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding with your company's travel department." Her tone was syrupy, but the implication cut like glass. She wasn't asking if his ticket was valid. She was asking if he really belonged in this class of travel at all. Christopher looked up, eyes steady. "Ms. Grant, I'm certain. There is no misunderstanding. My name is on the ticket, and the scanner confirmed it twice." Evelyn's smile tightened. She hesitated, then stepped back, but the damage was done. Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, some smirking, others frowning. The spectacle had turned into a performance of doubt, staged at his expense. Richard seized the moment. His voice, practiced in boardrooms and charity galas, carried easily. "You see, even the staff doubts him. This is why standards matter. First class is for people who belong, not for stunts." A ripple of laughter came from somewhere in the back of the cabin. Not everyone joined in, but enough did to sting. Christopher's stomach knotted, though his face remained a mask of calm. He remembered high school debates where he'd been the only black student on stage, the crowd waiting for him to falter. He remembered investors cutting meetings short, mistaking him for an assistant instead of the founder. Each time he had swallowed the sting and turned it into fuel. This moment was no different. He set his notebook on the tray table, raised his head, and said clearly enough for everyone to hear, "I am Christopher Langston, founder and CEO of Medcore AI. My ticket is valid, my seat is valid, and I am staying right here." The words landed like a gavel strike. A few passengers applauded softly, tentative, as though testing whether it was safe to show support. Others stayed silent, unwilling to risk discomfort. Richard scoffed. Medcore AI never heard of it. Probably some diversity handout dressed up as a business. That cut deeper than Christopher wanted to admit. His company wasn't just a business. It was his life's work, built from scratch, designed to save lives. The dismissal felt like erasure, a refusal to see the reality of what he had accomplished. Before Christopher could respond, Captain Harris returned from the cockpit. His voice was even, but there was an edge beneath it. "Is there a problem here?" Richard jumped at the chance. "Yes, Captain, there is. This man is creating a disturbance. He doesn't belong in 1A, and, frankly, he's making everyone uncomfortable. Everyone Christopher thought, or just you." The captain turned toward Christopher. "Mr. Langston, your ticket is valid. You are not required to move. Do you wish to continue this flight?" "Yes," Christopher said simply. "Then that's the end of it. Harris said, his tone final. "Mr. Whitfield, I expect you to conduct yourself appropriately. We have safety protocols, and that includes respect." Richard's face flushed crimson. For a moment, Christopher thought he might explode. Instead, he sank back into his seat, muttering under his breath. His wife clutched his arm, whispering something about lawyers and reputations. The passengers settled again, though the energy in the cabin had shifted. The humiliation had been public, undeniable, and not just for Christopher. Richard, too, had been forced to sit down, his authority challenged. But humiliation never disappears quietly. It festers, searching for a new outlet. Christopher leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. He could almost hear his mother's voice. "They will try to make you small. Your job is to stay whole." A child's laugh rang out somewhere behind him, innocent and unknowing. Life went on, even inside this tense bubble. Christopher opened his notebook again and wrote another line. "This is bigger than me. It always is." He didn't yet know how true those words would become. Because within the hour, the flight would face a crisis that no wealth, no entitlement, no prejudice could solve. And when that moment came, every eye on the plane would turn to the man they had tried to push out of seat 1A. The engines roared to life as the cabin lights dimmed. Passengers settled, adjusting seatbelts and scrolling on their phones, while flight attendants hurried through final safety checks. The confrontation seemed, at least outwardly, to have ended. Christopher sat with his notebook closed on the tray, his gaze steady out the small oval window. Yet, inside, his chest still carried the echo of every word hurled at him. The intercom chimed. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure," Captain Harris announced. His voice was steady, authoritative, the kind that reassured nervous travelers. But before the plane could push back, a shrill alarm pierced the cockpit. In the cabin, passengers heard only muffled tones, but Harris froze, eyes darting to the control panel. Warning lights flashed in quick succession, sensor malfunctions, data inconsistencies, a cascade of alerts that made no sense. The co-pilot frowned. "Captain, that's the new MedCore integration system. Isn't it FAA rolled it out last quarter?" Harris nodded grimly. "Yes. And if the diagnostics fail, we don't leave this gate down in 1A. Christopher noticed Evelyn whispering urgently into the intercom. Her eyes darted toward him, then away, as though she'd realized something she didn't want to admit. Moments later, Captain Harris emerged from the cockpit, his face calm but taut. He scanned the first-class cabin until his eyes landed on Christopher. "Mr. Langston's head swiveled. Murmurs swept through the cabin. Christopher felt the weight of every gaze. Slowly, he stood. "Yes, Captain. I understand you're the founder of MedCore AI." Richard barked a laugh. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Now we're going to turn this flight into a press release for his little startup." But Harris ignored him. His voice carried the weight of necessity. "Mr. Langston, the new FAA safety software, your software is flagging errors. Our ground team is stumped. If we can't resolve them, this plane doesn't leave the gate. We may need your assistance." The words landed like a thunderclap. Passengers straightened in their seats. Some blinked in disbelief. Others leaned forward, sensing something larger unfolding. The man who had been told he didn't belong in 1A was suddenly the only one who could keep the plane from taking off. Christopher inhaled deeply, steadying himself. He hadn't expected to be summoned here, not today, not like this. But he also knew this was no accident. His company had been working with the FAA to integrate MedCore AI's predictive diagnostics into aircraft systems nationwide. If the alerts were firing, it meant the system was doing exactly what it was built to do, prevent catastrophe. He looked at Harris. "Show me the readouts." Richard exploded. "This is madness." You can't seriously let him. He's not even airline staff. He's just. But Harris cut him off sharply. Mr. Whitfield, sit down. Right now. The authority in his voice silenced even Richard. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. Christopher followed Harris down the aisle into the cockpit. The door closed behind them, sealing him into the cramped, high-tech sanctuary of flight control. Screens glowed with red and amber warnings. Digital voices repeating, "System anomaly detected. Diagnostic incomplete." The co-pilot looked nervous. "Captain, if this isn't resolved, FAA regulations force us to ground the flight indefinitely." Christopher leaned over the console, his eyes scanning the error codes. He recognized the patterns instantly. Not mechanical failure, not pilot error, data inconsistencies caused by outdated firmware. A problem he had warned the FAA about in endless meetings. "This isn't a system failure," he said firmly. "It's a patch conflict. The old software is rejecting the new AI protocols. Give me 5 minutes, and I can recalibrate it." Harris studied him, searching his face for doubt. He found none. "Do it." Christopher pulled his tablet from his bag, his fingers moving with practiced precision. Code scrolled across the screen. Commands entered in quick succession. Sweat beaded at his temple, not from fear, but from the intensity of knowing one slip could ground the entire flight. Behind him, Harris watched closely. The captain had flown for 30 years, seen storms, near misses, medical emergencies, but he had never seen a passenger step into his cockpit and begin rewriting the lifeline of the aircraft itself. After minutes that felt like hours, the alarms softened, warning lights shifted from red to green. The cabin's hum steadied again. Christopher exhaled, leaning back. There. System stabilized. The AI is syncing with the legacy firmware. You're safe to fly. The co-pilot whistled under his breath. "Unbelievable." Harris extended a hand. "Thank you, Mr. Langston. Without you, this flight wouldn't have left the ground." Christopher shook his hand, his grip steady. "That's why we built it, to keep people safe, even when the system doubts itself." As they stepped back into the cabin, passengers craned their necks, whispering urgently. Evelyn stood frozen, her professional mask faltering. Harris raised his voice for all to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this flight is now cleared for departure thanks to the expertise of Mr. Christopher Langston, the developer of the very system that protects us in the air. Without his intervention, we would still be on the ground." Gasps, murmurs, and finally applause filled the cabin. Not everyone clapped, but enough did that the sound carried. Christopher returned to seat 1A, the same seat some had tried to strip from him minutes earlier. Richard's face was pale, his jaw tight. He muttered something under his breath, but this time no one echoed him. Even his wife looked away, her eyes fixed on the seat back in front of her. Christopher sat down quietly, opening his notebook again. He wrote one line. "Sometimes the seat isn't about comfort, it's about purpose." The engines roared louder, the plane beginning its slow pushback from the gate. Passengers settled into their seats. But the mood had shifted. Everyone now knew the truth. The man they had doubted, dismissed, even mocked was the very reason they could fly at all. Christopher closed his notebook, folded his hands, and stared out the window at the rising sun. And though the plane would soon lift into the sky, he sensed that the real flight, the one that would test every ounce of his strength, was only just beginning. Christopher returned to his seat, the quiet of first class now feeling different. The passengers were no longer murmuring with impatience or annoyance. They watched him with a mix of awe and curiosity, some even whispering apologies under their breath. Evelyn approached him quietly. "Mr. Langston, everyone's watching you now. I wanted to say I'm sorry for earlier," she said, her voice low but sincere. I judged without knowing. I should have listened. Christopher nodded, giving a faint smile. Thank you, Evelyn. What matters is that we move forward. Judgment without understanding doesn't help anyone. Richard Whitfield leaned toward his wife, muttering under his breath, This is ridiculous. We're stuck here because of him. A passenger. An upstart. We're paying thousands for this flight, and it's grounded because of his whims. Mrs. Whitfield, silent until now, finally spoke. Richard, maybe it's not about money. Maybe it's about recognizing talent when it's right in front of us. Her voice trembled slightly, but there was truth in her words. Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further. Meanwhile, the captain made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. The situation is now under control thanks to the intervention of Mr. Christopher Langston. He has resolved the software issues preventing our departure. We will begin taxiing shortly. The applause that followed was longer this time. Christopher felt the weight of the moment pressing down, not as a burden, but as a confirmation of everything he had fought for. He wasn't just sitting in first class. He had earned this seat in more ways than anyone on the plane could possibly understand. As the plane began its slow taxi to the runway, Christopher's mind shifted to the bigger picture. The MedCore AI system he had developed wasn't just keeping passengers safe on flights. It had the potential to prevent disasters everywhere: hospitals, clinics, even rural communities that lacked sufficient medical infrastructure. But with that power came responsibility. His phone buzzed with a message from his mentor. Dr. Amelia Foster Christopher, you just proved that being in the right seat isn't about entitlement. It's about responsibility. Be ready. The board will want a full report. He typed back quickly. Understood. This is just the beginning. The plane lifted off smoothly, climbing into the clear morning sky. The city below shrank, and with it, the tension that had gripped the cabin. But as the clouds engulfed them, Christopher felt a new challenge looming, one far larger than a grounded plane or skeptical passengers. Back in first class, a young woman hesitated before speaking. She was in her early 20s, wearing a badge from a nonprofit organization focused on education. Mr. Langston, may I speak with you? She asked, her voice slightly shaky. Christopher gestured for her to sit across from him. Of course. What's on your mind? My name is Amira Benson. I've been following MedCore AI's work for months. We work with underserved schools, trying to get children interested in STEM. My students, many of them Black and Latino, they see people like you and finally believe they can do anything. I wanted to thank you. Christopher felt a lump form in his throat. Thank you, Amira. That's why we do this work. Not for recognition, not for accolades, but for moments like this, for the people who see themselves in what we do. Amira nodded, her eyes glistening. Some of them even drew pictures today. They said they wanted to build AI like yours one day. You've changed their perspective completely. Christopher smiled softly. Good. Encourage them to dream, and remind them it's not just about technology, it's about the courage to claim your space when no one expects you to. As the flight continued, the cabin atmosphere shifted. People who had been skeptical or indifferent now watched him with genuine interest. Flight attendants paused to exchange nods of respect. Even Richard Whitfield, begrudgingly, avoided looking directly at Christopher, though he could no longer deny the young CEO's skill and composure. The co-pilot approached Christopher quietly. Mr. Langston, Captain Harris insists I tell you. He wants you in the cockpit for final landing prep. He says your system will integrate with the airport's guidance protocols. Christopher hesitated. The thought of being responsible for landing the plane, carrying everyone's lives in his hands, was daunting. He had resolved software issues before, but never with this magnitude, never in real time, never with hundreds of strangers depending on him. But he knew he couldn't refuse. "All right," he said, standing, his posture steady. "Lead the way." As he entered the cockpit, the atmosphere changed again. The tension from before now mingled with anticipation. Captain Harris gestured toward the controls. "Christopher, this is where your work meets reality. Follow my lead, and the system you designed will guide us safely." "Are you ready?" "I'm ready," Christopher replied, scanning the array of instruments and displays. He activated the MedCore AI integration, syncing the plane systems with the airport's guidance network. Lights shifted from red to green. Indicators stabilized. Passengers remained unaware of the exact technical ballet happening behind the cockpit door. But the subtle change in the hum of the engines and the cabin's smooth vibration told them something extraordinary had occurred. Minutes later, the plane began its final descent. Christopher monitored every parameter, adjusting thresholds in real time. Captain Harris's voice was calm but tinged with admiration. "You're doing phenomenal work, Mr. Langston. I've flown thousands of landings, and I've never had a system respond this precisely." Christopher's fingers hovered over the console, but he allowed the automation to perform its function while he oversaw it. Every descent rate, angle, and alignment was perfect. The runway lights stretched out ahead, welcoming the aircraft. The plane touched down smoothly, wheels kissing the tarmac with barely a whisper. Relief rippled through the cockpit and cabin alike. Passengers clapped spontaneously, some standing to cheer. Christopher felt an immense, almost surreal sense of accomplishment, but it was tempered with awareness. This was one flight, one moment. The systemic changes he wanted to see in the world were just beginning. Evelyn approached him as he returned to 1A. "Mr. Langston, you just saved this flight. Everyone knows it now. Well, some of the passengers who didn't believe in you have changed their minds." Christopher smiled gently. "It's not about belief. It's about capability. And about making sure those who are underestimated get their chance to prove it." Richard Whitfield finally looked at him, uncharacteristically quiet. "I suppose congratulations are in order," he muttered, though the words lacked conviction. Christopher nodded politely. "Thank you. Mr. Whitfield, I hope next time we can all remember that talent can appear in any seat, any place, any circumstance." As the passengers disembarked, many stopped to offer handshakes, nods, or brief words of appreciation. Young students, businessmen, flight attendants, and even skeptical travelers all recognized the quiet power of one person refusing to be invisible. Christopher gathered his bag and followed the exit signs, Evelyn walking beside him. Outside, the airport tarmac was bustling, the morning sun casting long shadows. Media crews had gathered, sensing a story far larger than just a technical malfunction. Christopher paused for a moment, looking up at the clear blue sky. He thought about the thousands of young people watching, about the communities he hoped to impact, about the systems he aimed to change. This flight had been a crucible, but it had also been a signal the world was ready to see him, to see people like him for what they could accomplish, not what others assumed they couldn't. And as the first cameras focused on him, Christopher Langston realized this. Sometimes the seat you fight for isn't just a physical place. It's the platform from which change begins. Once off the plane, Christopher felt the weight of the morning settle on his shoulders. The applause, the cheers, the cameras, it all receded behind him as he stepped into the quiet corridor of Logan Airport. Evelyn walked beside him, carrying his carry-on with a professional grace. Yet her eyes reflected admiration and something like relief. "Christopher, you did it," she said softly. "You didn't just fix the problem, you handled every single human being on that plane with dignity. That's rare." He nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Every system he had designed, every protocol he had created, every AI integration, it all worked flawlessly. But what if the stakes were higher? What if lives were dependent not on simulated data, but on actual decisions in moments of crisis? He felt the weight of that thought pressing against his chest. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Some were airport staff curious about the commotion. Others were journalists who had gotten wind of the unfolding drama. A young cameraman stepped forward, holding a microphone. "Mr. Langston, can you tell us how it feels to literally stop a plane from taking off and save hundreds of lives?" Christopher paused. His instinct was to say something simple, but he knew this moment could become more than a headline. It could become a lesson, a symbol. "It's not about me," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. "It's about ensuring that the systems we create respect every human life, that no one is invisible because of assumptions or bias." Today was one flight. Tomorrow, it's the policies we build, the people we empower, the communities we serve. Amira Benson pushed forward through the crowd, camera in hand. "Mr. Langston, my students, thousands of them, are watching. They're inspired. They want to know how someone like you navigates a world that underestimates them." Christopher looked at her, feeling the gravity of her words. "You tell them this. Never let others decide your worth. Your seat at the table, your place in any room, claim it. And when you do, use it to lift others. That's the only way we change systems, not just perceptions." The journalists scribbled furiously, but Christopher's mind was already moving forward. He had appointments with Medcor's board, meetings with potential investors, and plans to expand the AI diagnostic tool into underserved communities. Each item was a priority, and each carried a moral dimension he could not ignore. He finally allowed himself to take a deep breath as he entered the private car waiting outside. Marcus Rivera, his longtime friend and COO, sat in the front seat. "Man, that was insane. I've never seen anything like it. You've got the whole airport talking, the media buzzing, and I've got to ask, how are you holding up?" Christopher leaned back, staring out the window at the bustling city. "I'm fine." "Marcus, I'm exhausted." "Yes, but fine." The real question is whether we're ready to handle what comes next. This isn't just about one flight. It's about accountability at every level. Marcus nodded. "Understanding more than words could convey. We'll handle it together. But I have to warn you, your story is going viral. People are going to want interviews, appearances, panels. They're going to treat you like a symbol, whether you want it or not." Christopher let out a small, rueful laugh. "A symbol. I've spent my life avoiding that word. But maybe today it's necessary. Maybe it's what inspires the change I've been working toward." Back at Medcor's headquarters, the board meeting began immediately. Christopher entered the room, greeted by a mixture of awe, skepticism, and anticipation. Chairman Gerald Houghton cleared his throat. "Mr. Langston, your actions today were unprecedented. But we need to discuss the implications. The AI system integration. You performed it worked, yes, but it was unsanctioned. The board has questions about liability, public perception, and the scalability of your approach." Christopher took a seat, opening his laptop to present the data collected during the flight. Charts displayed real-time system adjustments, error prevention logs, and passenger safety metrics. Chairman Houghton: "The system was designed for scalability and resilience. Today's flight was a stress test, not a gamble. Every decision made was based on protocols already approved by Medcor's R&D division. What happened is exactly what the system was built to do: protect human life while integrating real-time human oversight. Several board members exchanged glances, murmuring among themselves. Eleanor Tran, head of corporate compliance, spoke up. Christopher, you handled it perfectly, but you also exposed the company to potential litigation and regulatory scrutiny. How do you plan to address that? Christopher leaned forward, his eyes calm but unwavering. We address it by being transparent. Every action, every decision, every log is documented. No shortcuts, no cover-ups. Accountability isn't optional, it's essential. If the world is going to trust Medcor, we must model that trust, not just promise it. A younger board member, Michael Lewis, spoke next. And what about public perception? Social media is ablaze. The story of the plane not taking off without you is everywhere. Some are calling you a hero. Others, well, they're skeptical, even hostile. Christopher nodded slowly. Let them be. Change is uncomfortable for those who benefit from the status quo. My focus is not on popularity. It's on results. Lives were impacted today, systems were tested, and lessons were learned. That is what matters. Outside, the media frenzy intensified. Reporters sought statements, while social media users shared videos of the flight's resolution, praising Christopher's quick thinking and calm demeanor. Hashtags like #MeYourSeat1A and Langston Effect began trending, signaling the story's widespread resonance. Later that evening, back in his modest apartment, Christopher reflected on the day. His phone buzzed continuously with messages of support from mentors, young students inspired by his actions, and professionals thanking him for demonstrating that excellence knows no boundaries of race, age, or circumstance. One message stood out. It was from his mother. Patricia Langston, baby. You were calm when others panicked. You were steady when others doubted. I am proud, but remember, pride without humility is hollow. Stay grounded. The world is watching, and so are those who will follow your lead. Christopher stared at the screen, feeling a swell of emotion. This was the essence of leadership, not just solving immediate problems, but inspiring courage, integrity, and possibility in others. As he prepared for the next day, a new wave of determination washed over him. The flight had ended, but the journey was far from complete. There were systems to overhaul, biases to confront, and communities to empower. And he knew, deep within, that the seat he had fought for, the literal and metaphorical seat, was only the beginning of a larger mission, ensuring that no person would ever be invisible simply because the world refused to see them. The following morning, Christopher woke to a city buzzing with the aftermath of yesterday's events. His phone was inundated with notifications, news outlets, social media mentions, and messages from colleagues he hadn't spoken to in years. The world had witnessed his intervention, and now they wanted insight, explanation, and accountability. He brewed his morning coffee, sitting by the window of his apartment overlooking Boston's skyline. The rising sun cast golden light across the streets, and for a moment, the chaos outside seemed distant. Evelyn's voice came through his speakerphone. Christopher, the press conference is in 1 hour. You ready? He inhaled deeply. Ready as I'll ever be. But Evelyn, I don't want this to become about me. It's not about headlines or applause. It's about the systems we're building, the people we're empowering. She chuckled softly. You've always been about the bigger picture. That's why people will follow you. Don't overthink it. Let them see who you are and why you fight. At the press room, a sea of journalists, photographers, and camera crews filled the space. The tension was palpable. Christopher stepped to the podium, the weight of the morning still lingering, but tempered by resolve. He scanned the room, noting familiar faces, some friendly, others skeptical, and many neutral. A reporter from a national network raised his hand first. "Mr. Langston, some critics say you were elevated to a position of visibility because of your race, rather than your qualifications. How do you respond?" Christopher straightened, his voice calm but penetrating. "I understand the skepticism, but I ask that critics examine history. Who has been elevated? Who has been ignored? And why? I am here because of my work in AI diagnostics, my years of study, and my first-hand experience with healthcare disparities. Those are my qualifications. My race is not a limitation. It is a context, a perspective, a call to innovate where systems have failed for too long." Another reporter followed, her tone sharper. "You haven't even graduated from medical school." "Isn't this premature?" Christopher paused. Premature would be waiting another generation while preventable illnesses claim lives. Premature would be denying opportunities to young people with potential because of assumptions. I may be young, but the communities I aim to serve have waited centuries. If anything, we are overdue. Questions continued for nearly an hour, ranging from technical specifics about the AI system to broader inquiries about ethics and equity. Christopher's answers were measured, backed by data, yet infused with empathy. By the end, even the most skeptical reporters were visibly impressed, some scribbling notes furiously, others quietly nodding in acknowledgement. After the press conference, Christopher returned to his apartment to find it transformed. Neighbors had left messages of encouragement, flowers, and even small handwritten letters. Marcus was waiting outside, a wide grin on his face. "Man, you just stood in front of the nation and told them that dignity is not negotiable. Do you realize how huge that is?" Christopher smiled, weary but energized. "It's only the beginning. The real work starts now." His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Opening it, he saw a photo of a young black girl, perhaps 10 years old, holding a toy stethoscope with a sign that read, "Future doctor like Christopher Langston." The accompanying note said, "My daughter saw you on TV. For the first time, she believes she can be a doctor. Thank you for showing her she belongs." Christopher's chest tightened. This was the ripple effect he had hoped for, the realization that one act of courage could inspire countless others to believe in themselves. He saved the message, letting the image linger on his screen as a quiet reminder of the stakes. The next morning brought unexpected resistance. Protesters had gathered outside Boston Medical School, holding signs that read, "Merit, not melanin and reverse racism is still racism." Security kept them at a distance, but their chants echoed through the building. Inside, Dean Richardson addressed the students. "I want to be clear," he said. "Boston Medical School stands with Christopher Langston and all students who have earned their place here. These protesters do not represent our values, but change creates resistance. How we respond defines us." Jasmine Williams, a student and friend of Christopher, stood. "Dean, words are good, but what concrete actions is the administration taking to protect students like Christopher who are targeted?" The dean shifted. "We are reviewing security protocols and coordinating with law enforcement." "That's not enough." David Kim, a previously quiet classmate, interjected. "Christopher is risking everything to create change." What are we risking? What is the school risking? A discussion erupted, with students proposing counter-protests, educational forums, and partnerships with community organizations. Within an hour, they had organized a response that would become legendary in the school's history. The next day, the protesters returned, only to be met by a sea of white coats. Each student, faculty member, and staff held a sign with their personal story, first-generation doctor, immigrant success story, former teen parent, aspiring pediatrician. The protesters, overwhelmed, dispersed within the hour. Later, Dr. Sarah Kim, Christopher's genetics professor, pulled him aside. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. 20 years ago, I was denied a research position because I was deemed too quiet to lead a lab. Seeing you fight, not just for yourself, but for all of us, is healing wounds I didn't know still hurt. Christopher absorbed her words, recognizing that his fight extended beyond himself. It was for anyone ever dismissed or overlooked. Christopher sat in the quiet of his apartment, though silence was rare these days. His phone vibrated incessantly, each alert a reminder of the growing scrutiny from healthcare corporations and influential stakeholders. Several major healthcare companies were threatening to withdraw funding from the Health Equity Initiative unless he moderated his positions. They claimed his approach was too radical and disruptive for the system. James Patterson, his longtime mentor and advisor, called first Christopher. "We have a serious situation. These companies control billions, and if they pull back, entire communities could be affected. You need to temper your approach." Christopher leaned back in his chair, staring out at the early morning skyline. They never truly wanted change. They wanted the appearance of progress without discomfort. "We can't compromise on dignity. We can't allow greed to dictate who deserves care. If they walk away, we document it and let the public decide." James hesitated, the weight of reality pressing on him. "We're talking about billions in lives. Every day we delay, people die from preventable conditions." "Are you ready for that responsibility?" "I've never been more ready," Christopher replied. "The moment we make exceptions for comfort is the moment we betray the very people we're meant to serve. Human dignity isn't negotiable." "James, that's not radical, that's right." The conversation ended, but the tension lingered. Christopher spent the day preparing reports, speeches, and strategy briefs for meetings with the Health Equity Coalition at Harvard Medical School. His professors noticed the exhaustion etched into his face. Dr. Robert Chen, his surgery rotation supervisor, pulled him aside. "Christopher, you can't save everyone if you destroy yourself in the process. Even revolutionaries need rest." That evening, a knock at his apartment door interrupted his studies. Standing there was Dr. Tendai Mukamori, flown in from Geneva. Her presence carried urgency. "Christopher, what you're building in America has global implications. The World Health Organization wants to adapt your AI diagnostic tool for refugee camps, rural villages, and regions without traditional healthcare infrastructure. But we need the philosophy behind it, the insistence that every life is equal." They sat together for hours, mapping a vision for global health equity. The AI tool could be translated into hundreds of languages, adapted for diverse cultural contexts, and deployed through basic smartphones to reach billions. The conversation shifted from technology to ethics, strategy, and justice. Dr. Mukamori even mentioned the Nobel Committee had begun discussions about recognizing Christopher's work not for medicine, but for demonstrating that healthcare equity is essential to human dignity and peace. Christopher left that evening stunned. 6 weeks ago, he had been fighting for a seat on an airplane. Now, his name was being discussed by global organizations. He opened his laptop and reviewed maps tracking the AI tool's deployment, each light a community now receiving care that had long been denied. Amid this whirlwind, his mother called. "Baby, your father would be proud. But there's news you need to hear. Mr. Reynolds." Christopher froze. What about him? His heart gave out last night while working his night shift. "He didn't survive, but he left a letter for you. A personal message to guide the resources he's entrusting to your initiatives. $800 million, Christopher. Every cent is meant to fuel justice, equity, and transformation. Christopher held the envelope in trembling hands. He knew the magnitude of the responsibility, not just funding clinics or scholarships, but reshaping the way society saw and valued people. Jerome, the janitor Reynolds had mentored, was enrolled in engineering school thanks to the provision. Christopher realized that every invisible person carried potential waiting to be recognized. The following day, Congress hearings called him to testify on the Health Equity Act. Hostile representatives questioned him on socialism, reverse racism, and the so-called radical nature of his proposals. Christopher remained composed, using statistics, personal stories, and moral reasoning to demonstrate the urgency and fairness of equitable health care. One particularly aggressive congressman asked, "Why should we fund universal health care when our constituents already receive excellent care?" Christopher looked him squarely in the eyes. "The only radical act here is that it hasn't happened yet. Your constituents shouldn't enjoy privileges while others are denied basic care. If we wait for comfort to dictate justice, generations will suffer. That's the radical injustice." Clips of the testimony went viral. Millions shared the footage, sparking a wave of public discourse. Opposition began to waver, and several previously resistant lawmakers reconsidered their stance. Despite this, the pace of events was exhausting. Christopher barely slept, juggling lectures, hospital rotations, public appearances, and strategy meetings. Dr. Kim, his mentor at Harvard, reminded him again, even leaders need rest. You can't inspire change if you collapse under its weight. One night, forced into a brief pause, Christopher watched news coverage of himself. The confident, articulate figure on screen seemed distant, almost another person. Alone in his apartment, he felt the pressure, the expectation of a nation, of communities, and of individuals looking to him for hope. The phone rang. A young voice from Nigeria, Amara, 15, whose village lacked hospitals, spoke with urgency. "Mr. Langston, I passed my exams. I'm going to medical school in Lagos. The elders in my village who opposed girls' education are proud now. But I want to do more. How can I help my friends who are still denied schooling?" Christopher spent an hour strategizing with her, connecting her with scholarships, digital textbooks, and mentors. "Your perspective is a superpower. Amara, you belong in medicine just as much as anyone." That call reminded him that his journey was no longer local. It was global. Every act of courage rippled beyond borders. By the morning, news of Reynolds's death and bequest had leaked. James Patterson called along with board members, excited at the opportunity to implement the AI system nationally with the $800 million funding. Christopher listened but interrupted. "We need more than systems. We need to transform how people see value. We can't just fill clinics. We have to empower communities, recognize talent in unexpected places, and challenge assumptions that have kept people invisible for generations." That afternoon, Christopher attended Reynolds's funeral at his mother's church in Roxbury. The church overflowed with business leaders, many visibly uncomfortable in the modest surroundings. Pastor Williams delivered a sermon that shifted perspectives. Wealth without purpose is poverty. Power without service is weakness. A life spent stepping on others is a life spent falling. Executives spoke of Reynolds's business acumen, deals, and strategic vision. When Christopher rose, silence fell. He spoke of Reynolds' transformation, how a man who had spent decades walking past invisible people chose discomfort over delusion, clarity over convenience. He challenged the audience. How many of you have walked past your janitors without acknowledgement? How many decisions affecting thousands were made without consulting the affected? This is your choice, end of one journey, or beginning of institutional change. Jerome sat in the back row, tears in his eyes, as Christopher spoke. After the service, Jerome introduced himself, recounting how Reynolds had ensured his education. He said, "You showed him excellence comes in all colors and contexts," Jerome whispered. Christopher realized that the funeral was not only a farewell, but a turning point for every executive, every community, every individual who would be touched by the initiative. Christopher walked into the newly renovated offices of the Reynolds Redemption Foundation, the air buzzing with quiet anticipation. The $800 million bequest had transformed the space, with walls lined with photographs and quotes documenting William Reynolds' journey from invisible janitor to agent of transformation. He paused at a photograph of Reynolds scrubbing the executive floor, the determination in his eyes almost palpable. It was a reminder that true leadership often begins with humility and service. The first meeting convened with James Patterson, Dr. Morrison from Morehouse College, Jasmine Williams from Harvard, and several board members of the foundation. Christopher took a deep breath. Our mission is simple but ambitious. We identify talent in unexpected places, provide educational opportunities, mentorship, and direct support. We rebuild access to healthcare, engineering, and leadership positions for those who have been overlooked, marginalized, or denied their rightful seat at the table. Board members exchanged glances. One older executive, Harrison, raised concerns. "Christopher, this is noble, but we risk overextension. Can we truly manage this scale effectively? These initiatives could collapse without careful control." Christopher's gaze met Harrison's. Control should not come at the expense of justice. We can't manage change if we only invest in comfort. The people we serve have waited decades for opportunity. If we move cautiously while they suffer, we fail them. It is our responsibility to act boldly. The foundation launched its first initiative, the Reynolds Scholars Program, aimed at first-generation college students from underserved communities. Christopher personally reviewed applications, his eyes scanning essays filled with resilience, hope, and untapped potential. He was struck by the stories a young man from Detroit who had been homeless, a girl from New Mexico whose school lacked science labs, and a refugee from Syria who had lost years of schooling. Each applicant was a reminder that the fight for access was far from over. Meanwhile, the AI diagnostic tool, now ready for national deployment, required extensive coordination with hospitals, clinics, and government agencies. Christopher worked long hours, ensuring the technology was culturally adapted, accessible on basic devices, and integrated into existing workflows. He visited rural clinics in Alabama, Mississippi, and West Virginia, witnessing firsthand the disparity in healthcare infrastructure. Nurses and local physicians welcomed the tool eagerly. But Christopher could sense the skepticism among administrators used to traditional practices. He patiently demonstrated the AI's ability to predict disease risks, streamline patient triage, and flag critical cases earlier than conventional methods. During one visit to a small clinic in Jackson, Mississippi, he met Dr. Laura Bennett, a physician who had spent decades treating chronic illness in underserved communities. "Christopher, if this works, it changes everything," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "But there will be resistance. People fear change, even when it saves lives." Christopher nodded. "Resistance is part of progress. We measure success not just by adoption, but by the lives saved, the opportunities created, and the dignity restored." Back in Boston, Christopher coordinated with Amara in Nigeria, ensuring the AI platform was adapted for rural villages and connected to local health workers. Her determination mirrored his own at that age, and her progress was a source of personal motivation. "Christopher, the nurses here trust me because I speak their language and understand their community. Your tool amplifies that trust. she reported during a video call. Despite these triumphs, challenges arose. Conservative media outlets amplified criticism, framing the foundation's initiatives as favoritism and overreach. Social media trolls targeted Christopher personally, questioning his age, his credentials, and his motives. One particularly harsh article accused him of leveraging tragedy for personal glory. Christopher read the pieces quietly, feeling the familiar pang of doubt. Later that evening, he found solace at his mother's home. Patricia Langston prepared tea as he sank into an armchair. "Mom, it's relentless. I feel like every step forward invites 100 setbacks." She poured the tea and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Baby, remember what your father told you? Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. You're building bridges for people who never had a chance. That's worth the struggle." Christopher nodded, the warmth of her words grounding him. The Reynolds Scholars Program's first cohort gathered for orientation at Harvard. Christopher stood before them, his heart swelling with pride and responsibility. "You are here because you earned it," he said. "Not because of privilege, not because of luck, but because of your talent, resilience, and determination. The world has often overlooked you, but we are here to ensure your skills, your voice, and your vision are recognized. This is not charity. This is justice." As the students shared their stories, one young woman, Sophia Martinez, described growing up in the same neighborhood as Jerome, the janitor who had inspired Reynolds. "Your story, Mr. Langston, gave my parents hope that I could become a doctor," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. Christopher felt a lump in his throat, realizing the cascading impact of his work, from a denied seat on a plane to nationwide scholarships and mentorship programs. Not every moment was triumphant. During a board meeting, Harrison once again questioned Christopher's pace. "Are we considering sustainability?" "The risk of burnout for staff, for students, is real," Christopher responded firmly. "Sustainability is important, but it cannot justify delaying justice. We adapt, we support, but we do not stall because others are comfortable." Amid these pressures, Christopher also focused on healthcare deployment. Thomas Washington, a homeless veteran he had met during rotations, was now part of the program as an advocate for healthcare access for marginalized populations. Witnessing Thomas present at a local government meeting, advocating for housing and care, reinforced the importance of integrating community voices into systemic change. One evening, while reviewing applications for the next wave of scholars, Christopher paused to reflect. The AI dashboards, the scholarship forms, the video calls with nurses in Nigeria and rural America, it was overwhelming. Yet he felt a profound connection to each story, each life impacted. These were not statistics, they were humans, each deserving recognition, opportunity, and dignity. His mother's voice broke the reverie. "Christopher, you're not just building programs. You're showing the world how to see people differently. That's harder than any medical challenge you'll face." He smiled softly, understanding the depth of her wisdom. As the foundation gained traction, success stories began to emerge. Jerome excelled in his engineering program. Amara's village clinics were operational, and the first cohort of Reynolds scholars demonstrated remarkable potential. But each triumph carried a reminder of the work still ahead: systemic inequities, entrenched prejudices, and bureaucratic inertia would not dissipate overnight. Christopher's resolve strengthened. The Reynolds Redemption Foundation was more than a vehicle for change. It was a movement, a philosophy, a challenge to society to recognize the inherent worth in every individual. Every decision, every intervention, and every life touched reinforced his belief that equity was not optional. It was imperative. Christopher Langston stood in the control room of the newly established Reynolds Health Network headquarters in Boston, watching real-time dashboards of clinics, hospitals, and mobile units connecting across the United States. Thousands of dots illuminated the screen, each representing a community gaining access to healthcare for the first time in decades. The AI diagnostic tool, designed to predict disease outbreaks and identify high-risk patients, was now live in 3,000 locations. The excitement in the room was palpable. Nurses cheered as one rural Alabama clinic reported its first early cancer detection thanks to the system. Thomas Washington, now a community advocate, called in to share the success in a homeless veteran shelter in Chicago. "Christopher, this is what we've been waiting for," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "People who were invisible are finally being seen." Christopher allowed himself a small smile, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. The first wave of public attention hit quickly. National news outlets ran stories about the launch, highlighting Christopher's age, race, and rapid rise from a Harvard medical student to CEO of a multi-million-dollar healthcare initiative. Conservative commentators immediately labeled him as radical, accusing him of overstepping and claiming the initiative was socialist in nature. Online, social media erupted with both support and vitriol. Hashtags praising Reynolds Redemption and the AI diagnostic tool trended alongside attack threads questioning Christopher's qualifications. In the middle of the storm, Christopher received a call from James Patterson. "Christopher, the coverage is intense. Some board members are nervous. They're worried about reputational risk and political pushback." Christopher rubbed his eyes. Exhaustion evident. "James, people's lives are at stake. The risk of inaction is far greater than any PR concern. We move forward, not backward. Let them criticize while we save lives." Later that afternoon, Christopher appeared on a live news program to defend the Reynolds Health Network. The anchor, skeptical and sharp, asked pointed questions. "Mr. Langston, critics say you're inexperienced, and this initiative could collapse under mismanagement. How do you respond?" Christopher leaned forward, his calm voice carrying authority. "The real question is why it took decades for an idea like this to be implemented. People in rural communities, underserved neighborhoods, and refugee settlements have been waiting for care that should have been guaranteed generations ago. I'm here because I can make it happen, not because of my age, race, or background." During the broadcast, a live feed from a clinic in Mississippi interrupted the segment. A young girl's early detection of a congenital heart defect, identified by the AI system, was being treated successfully. The anchor's skepticism faltered as the footage played. "These are real lives," Christopher continued. "The opposition is theoretical. The suffering is not." Despite the success stories, challenges persisted. Harrison, the skeptical board member, continued to question Christopher's pace. "Christopher, the backlash is intensifying. Are you prepared for the legal, political, and media storms this will bring?" Christopher replied, determination in his tone. "Harrison, justice doesn't wait for comfort. Every delay costs someone their life or their opportunity. We adapt, we defend, but we do not stop." Meanwhile, the personal toll was becoming evident. Christopher was sleeping less than 3 hours a night, balancing Harvard medical studies, Reynolds Redemption projects, and nationwide AI deployment. One evening, Dr. Laura Bennett pulled him aside at a clinic in rural Mississippi. "Christopher, you can't save everyone if you destroy yourself," she warned gently. "Even the most dedicated revolutionaries need rest and support." Christopher nodded reluctantly. "I know, but seeing the difference in these communities keeps me moving forward. Every life saved, every opportunity opened, it's worth the exhaustion." Back in Boston, the Reynolds Scholars cohort was expanding. Sophia Martinez, now fully immersed in her pre-med studies, organized a student-led initiative called the Seat 1A Fund, pooling resources to mentor and support aspiring medical students from underrepresented communities. Christopher watched via video call as students celebrated their first successful tutoring session. Jerome, now excelling in his engineering program thanks to the Foundation's support, led workshops for students interested in technology and infrastructure. Christopher felt a wave of pride, but also a heavy responsibility. Every success highlighted the lives still waiting for opportunity. Then came a crisis that would test everything Christopher had built. A major healthcare provider threatened to withdraw from the AI deployment, citing concerns over liability and public criticism. Their letter suggested that Christopher moderate his public statements to avoid political controversy. James Patterson called immediately. "Christopher, this is significant. Billions of dollars, thousands of clinics. Are you willing to compromise?" Christopher's voice was steady, almost defiant. "We do not compromise on human dignity. If they withdraw, we document it, communicate it, and let the public judge. We are accountable to the people we serve, not to those protecting comfort over justice." The provider pulled out, and social media erupted with debate. While some criticized Christopher as uncompromising, a wave of support surged. Patients, nurses, and local physicians shared stories of lives saved and opportunities restored. The public response amplified the impact of the initiative, reinforcing the Foundation's mission and credibility. One evening, exhausted from a day of media appearances, Christopher received an unexpected visitor, Amara, the young girl from Nigeria whose village had implemented the AI diagnostic system. She had flown to Boston for a brief visit, accompanied by local health workers. "Mr. Langston," she said, her voice strong despite the long journey, "your tool has saved lives in my community. People trust us now, and children are growing up healthy for the first time. Thank you." Christopher felt a surge of emotion, the global implications of his work crystallizing. "Amara, it's your courage and your belief that make this real. We are partners in this mission, and the world will see the results because of you." That night, Christopher reflected on the journey from his first flight on the plane, where he had been asked to leave first class, to this moment now at the helm of a nationwide initiative reshaping healthcare access. The stakes had never been higher, but neither had the possibilities. Each challenge, every moment of doubt, and every act of courage by those around him reaffirmed the belief that equity, dignity, and justice were not ideals, they were imperatives. As he prepared for the next day, Christopher received a video message from Thomas Washington, who had been advocating for homeless veterans. "Christopher, the city council just approved funding to integrate AI diagnostics into all shelters. You've given people like me a voice we never had. Don't stop. We're counting on you." Christopher stared at the screen, a quiet resolve settling over him. He would not stop. He could not. The plane, the nation, and the world could not take off without him. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Christopher Langston's Boston apartment, but he barely noticed. Overnight, news outlets had splashed his face across every major network. Headlines range from praise to scorn. Young visionary saves lives. Radical CEO endangers healthcare system. Is age and race-driving policy notifications buzzed relentlessly on his phone. Each ping carried a mix of encouragement, concern, and outright vitriol. Christopher took a deep breath. Centering himself, he had learned early that clarity under pressure was a skill that could save lives, literally. Today, he would testify before Congress to defend the Reynolds Health Network's rapid expansion and the AI diagnostic tool. As he reviewed his notes, He felt the weight of expectation, millions of Americans now watching, communities counting on him, and his own conscience questioning if he had done enough. Arriving at the Capitol, the atmosphere was tense. Lobbyists, staffers, and media crowded the hallways. Security protocols had been heightened after several threats were reported overnight. Christopher's mother, Patricia, insisted on accompanying him, a symbol of working-class perseverance and moral grounding. "We've been through worse, baby." "Just remember your truth," she whispered. Christopher nodded, squeezing her hand for reassurance. The hearing began with hostile questioning. Representative Thomas Caldwell, a long-serving conservative politician, leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Mr. Langston, your initiative is ambitious, yes. But is it reckless? You're a 25-year-old student running a multi-million-dollar program. Critics argue this is not about health care, but political posturing." Christopher's voice was steady, resonating through the chamber. "Congressman, let me reframe the question. What is reckless is delaying care to communities who have waited decades for access. What is reckless is ignoring the lives that could be saved because of bureaucracy, fear, or prejudice." A murmur ran through the audience. Christopher continued, citing precise data from clinics where early detection rates had increased by 400%. He shared stories of individual patients, a single mother in Mississippi diagnosed with early-stage cancer, a homeless veteran in Chicago getting treatment he would have otherwise been denied, a village in Nigeria seeing children vaccinated for the first time. Each story humanized the statistics, forcing even the most skeptical members of Congress to confront reality. Still, opposition remained fierce. Representative Caldwell, visibly frustrated, asked pointedly, "But Mr. Langston, you haven't even completed your medical degree. How can you oversee a program of this scale responsibly?" Christopher inhaled, remembering the plane, the seat, the struggle for recognition. Premature would be waiting another generation while people die from preventable conditions. Premature would be allowing potential to be squandered because of assumptions about age or race. "I may still be a student, but the communities we serve have waited centuries. If anything, we are overdue." During the session, social media feeds were alive with commentary. Clips of Christopher's testimony went viral within minutes. People shared personal stories of healthcare injustice, praising his courage and clarity. The hashtag Seat1A began trending nationwide, symbolizing both access and equity. After a brief recess, Christopher was approached by Senator Linda Morales, a moderate who had been quietly observing. "Christopher," she said, her tone measured, "you're putting yourself in the crosshairs politically. Are you prepared for the personal attacks, threats, and scrutiny that will come?" Christopher looked out at the chamber, taking in the faces of young staffers, patients, and journalists recording every word. "Senator, I didn't choose this for fame or comfort. I chose this because someone has to be the voice for the people without one. If that makes me a target, so be it. Silence is not an option when lives are at stake." Meanwhile, back in Boston, Jerome was fielding media inquiries on behalf of the foundation. As a former janitor turned engineer, he had become a symbol of the transformational impact of Reynolds Redemption. "People like me exist everywhere," he said during an interview. "We've been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. Christopher's work gives us a chance to be recognized for what we can do, not what society assumes about us." The story resonated widely, and the media coverage helped shift the narrative from attack to advocacy. As the day wore on, Christopher's testimony faced intense scrutiny, with heated exchanges between Congress members and foundation representatives. Several attempts were made to question the efficacy of the AI system, the financial oversight, and the ethical implications of deploying predictive diagnostics in underserved communities. Christopher remained composed, calmly referencing data, expert opinions, and testimonials from affected communities. He knew that every word mattered not just for approval, but for the lives hanging in the balance. Late in the afternoon, the hearing room was momentarily hushed as Christopher told the story of Amara, the young girl in Nigeria, and the difference one innovative approach could make globally. "This is not a political issue," he said, his voice carrying both authority and empathy. "This is about dignity, about equity, about the principle that healthcare should never be determined by zip code, race, or economic circumstance. We have the tools, we have the knowledge, we cannot allow prejudice or complacency to dictate who receives care." By the time the hearing concluded, several previously skeptical legislators had privately approached Christopher to express support, acknowledging both the innovation and moral imperative of the initiative. Outside the chamber, crowds of supporters, healthcare workers, students, and ordinary citizens waited to applaud, waving banners and holding signs emphasizing equity, access, and opportunity, exhausted but resolute. Christopher stepped outside, feeling the warmth of public support mixed with the tension of ongoing scrutiny. Patricia Langston placed a hand on his shoulder. "Baby, you did what you had to do. The world is watching. Now, they can't unsee what you've shown them." Christopher nodded, drawing strength from her presence. He realized that the journey had evolved from claiming a seat on a plane to claiming a seat at the table where systemic change was possible. And just like that, every challenge, every attack, every doubt faced became part of the larger mission, ensuring healthcare equity for all. The evening air in Boston was crisp as Christopher Langston returned to his apartment, the weight of the day pressing on his shoulders. The news cycle had exploded. Every channel, every website, every social media platform dissected his congressional testimony. Headlines were polarized: healthcare revolutionary or reckless student, accompanied by photos of him standing tall in the Capitol, his expression unwavering, yet fatigue subtly etched across his face. As he opened his door, his phone vibrated incessantly. Messages poured in from journalists, supporters, critics, and unknown numbers. Death threats were hidden among the well-wishes, and conspiracy theories circulated about his intentions. Christopher paused, closing his eyes. For a moment, he imagined himself back on the plane, the initial confrontation, the struggle for acknowledgement, the subtle whispers of doubt that had surrounded him. He had faced discrimination before, but this was different. This was public, national, and it was personal. Patricia Langston met him in the hallway, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "Baby, the world will test you. It's not just about the work. They'll try to break your spirit, but remember, you already know what's right. Never let them confuse noise for truth." Christopher nodded, the echo of her words grounding him. He understood that this fight was no longer about one hospital, one AI tool, or even one country. It was about the principle that human dignity could not be compromised. The next morning, Christopher attended a strategy meeting with James Patterson and other members of the Reynolds Health Network. They were facing an unprecedented media onslaught, with conservative commentators questioning his qualifications and motives. "They're trying to turn your youth and your race into a liability," James said, scrolling through a string of articles. "We need a plan that turns this attack into advocacy." Christopher leaned forward, determination shining in his eyes. "We won't react defensively. We'll amplify the voices of those we serve. Every patient, every community member, every healthcare worker who has been ignored. That's the story. That's the truth they can't deny." Over the next few days, Christopher became both the target and the storyteller. He appeared on national talk shows, sometimes facing outright hostility. One particularly tense interview featured a commentator who insisted, "Mr. Langston, you're being elevated because of your race, not your accomplishments. Don't you see the unfair advantage you're taking?" Christopher's calm reply resonated across the country. The real unfairness is the system that has historically excluded people based on race. I'm here because I have solutions that work. My race isn't a liability, it's part of the lived experience that informs these solutions. The real question is, why has it taken so long for systems like this to exist amid the media frenzy? Threats against Christopher escalated. Anonymous emails, voicemails, and even physical intimidation became part of daily life. Security measures were heightened, but the psychological toll weighed heavily. One night, after a particularly hostile appearance on a cable network, Christopher sat alone, staring at his reflection in the apartment window. The city lights glittered, but the world inside him was turbulent. He thought of Amara in Nigeria, of Jerome, of Patricia, of every individual counting on him. He realized that fear could paralyze, or it could focus. He chose focus. Christopher decided to use the media storm to amplify the movement. He organized a series of live-stream town halls where patients and community leaders shared their stories of systemic neglect and healthcare barriers. These testimonies were raw, heartfelt, and impossible to ignore. In one session, Thomas Washington, the homeless veteran, spoke about his journey from near death to advocacy. "Christopher saw me when others didn't," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "He didn't just treat disease, he treated my humanity, and that changes everything." The response was overwhelming. Communities across the nation began sharing their own stories using the hashtag #ArtSeat1AHealth, sparking conversations about equity, access, and responsibility. Christopher's team compiled the testimonies, creating a digital map of impact that highlighted not just the reach of the AI tool, but the breadth of human stories it touched. Every narrative became a counterweight to the critics' claims, a living testament to what was possible when opportunity met action. Meanwhile, Jerome became an unexpected public figure. Interviews with him focused on his transformation from janitor to engineer, his scholarship funded through the Reynolds Redemption Initiative, and the tangible changes in his community. He often ended by saying, "We all have potential. The only barrier is whether someone will see it. Christopher saw it in me, and now I want to see it in others." His story provided a human face to the abstract concepts of systemic change, drawing empathy and engagement from audiences who might otherwise have remained indifferent. During this time, Christopher faced moments of deep internal struggle. He questioned whether the pace of change was sustainable, whether the threats were a sign of personal danger, and whether his mission could survive scrutiny and opposition. At night, Patricia would find him on the balcony, gazing at the city skyline. "Baby, it's okay to rest," she would say. "Even warriors need sleep. Strength isn't just in endurance, it's in knowing when to pause." Christopher slowly learned that leadership required not just courage in action, but courage in reflection. The tipping point came during a live national forum. A young nurse shared the story of her patient, a 10-year-old boy with undiagnosed diabetes who would have been overlooked without the AI diagnostic tool. The boy's mother, tearfully recounting the fear of losing her child, concluded, "Christopher didn't just see numbers, he saw us." The audience, both in the studio and online, erupted in applause. Even staunch critics had to acknowledge the tangible difference Christopher's initiatives were making. By the end of the week, the narrative had shifted. Social media analytics showed a surge in positive engagement. Legislative aides reported growing interest among previously opposed senators, and grassroots organizations mobilized in support of the Health Equity Act. Christopher realized that turning personal attacks into opportunities for education, empathy, and advocacy was more powerful than any defensive statement. That night, alone in his apartment, Christopher drafted a letter to Amara, who had just completed her final exams in Nigeria. Your courage, your persistence, and your belief in what's right inspire all of us, he wrote. Remember, change doesn't happen because of fear. It happens because of those willing to act in spite of it. Keep learning, keep dreaming, and keep making the world better. He paused, reflecting on how far he had come from the seat on that plane to this moment where a global movement was coalescing around him. The morning sun cast a pale glow over Boston as Christopher Langston entered the conference room of Reynolds Health Network. He had been summoned to address a pressing issue. Several major healthcare corporations had threatened to withdraw support from the Health Equity Act initiatives unless he moderated his approach. The board members gathered around the polished mahogany table, their faces a mixture of concern and cautious optimism. James Patterson opened the discussion. Christopher, these corporations are saying you're moving too fast. They're worried about profit margins, compliance costs, and brand image. They want moderation. Christopher leaned forward, hands resting on the table. Moderation is compromise at the expense of human lives, he said quietly but firmly. Every day we delay, people die from preventable conditions. Our responsibility is to the communities we serve, not to corporate comfort. One of the older board members, Harrison, shifted uneasily in his seat. Chris, you have to understand, these companies bring billions in funding. If they pull out, programs could collapse. Christopher's gaze met Harrison's, steady and unwavering. Then let them withdraw. We will document it, show the public who prioritized profit over lives, and continue our work with or without them. Human dignity cannot be optional. It cannot be negotiable. The board murmured among themselves, unsure how to respond. James Patterson finally spoke. We can cover gaps temporarily, but are you sure this is sustainable? Christopher nodded. Sustainability isn't built on compromise. It's built on principles. We will restructure, find new partners, and expand our reach. Those unwilling to stand for equity are choosing irrelevance. Within the hour, Christopher began outreach to smaller mission-driven organizations, nonprofits, tech innovators, and healthcare startups all expressed willingness to collaborate once they saw the vision. The AI diagnostic tool, which had initially been limited to pilot programs, was now ready for national deployment in under-resourced hospitals. His team created a fast-track plan to implement the system across 3,000 clinics, with immediate training for local staff and integration with mobile health platforms. Despite the progress, internal pressures weighed on Christopher. He spent late nights in his apartment, reviewing contracts, analyzing data, and preparing for board meetings. Every decision carried moral and practical consequences. Could they scale rapidly without sacrificing quality? Could communities trust the rollout to meet their needs? The burden was immense. Yet Christopher found solace in the small victories: a community clinic identifying early-stage diabetes, a rural nurse reporting improved patient outcomes, and messages from young students inspired by the Seat 1A campaign. One evening, as the city lights twinkled outside his window, Christopher received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Tendai Mukamori had flown in from Geneva, his presence urgent yet composed. "Christopher," he said, his accent carrying the weight of global authority, "what you are building in America is now a blueprint for worldwide health equity. The World Health Organization wants to adapt your AI diagnostic tool for refugee camps, rural villages, and areas with minimal infrastructure. But we need more than technology. We need your philosophy." They spent hours discussing adaptation strategies, cultural context, and ethical frameworks. Dr. Mukamuri emphasized that the tool's success depended on both technology and trust. Communities needed to believe in its value, and local leaders needed to be part of its implementation. Christopher felt the enormity of the moment his work had transformed from national reform into a global initiative. At the same time, corporate resistance intensified. Representatives from multiple healthcare conglomerates demanded meetings, insisting that Christopher's uncompromising stance threatened profitability. During one particularly tense session, a senior executive warned, "You're alienating the very institutions that can help scale your solution. Without them, your impact will be limited." Christopher's response was measured but resolute. Impact measured in profits is meaningless when measured in lives lost. If collaboration requires abandoning equity, we will find partners who are willing to uphold both. That is non-negotiable. In the following days, his team worked tirelessly to secure alternative funding. Small healthcare providers, philanthropists, and community foundations stepped forward, inspired by Christopher's moral clarity and data-backed successes. Jerome, now a lead engineer on the AI project, coordinated with hospitals to implement upgrades and training. Amara, the young girl from Nigeria, participated virtually, sharing insights on accessibility in low-resource settings. Their combined efforts created a coalition of committed partners who shared the same vision: healthcare as a right, not a privilege. The tipping point arrived during a live-streamed press event. Christopher stood at the podium, flanked by Patricia, Jerome, and several community leaders. Cameras broadcasted his words to millions. "We have encountered resistance, not because we are wrong, but because our vision challenges established comfort. But comfort does not save lives. Equity does. Access does. Compassion does. Today, we announce the expansion of our AI diagnostic tool to thousands of additional clinics, with funding secured from mission-aligned organizations committed to justice, not profit." The audience erupted in applause. Messages flooded social media. Healthcare workers, students, and families across the nation shared their support using the hashtag #NabunaseQuity without compromise. Even former critics had to acknowledge the tangible impact of the initiative. Christopher watched as the movement gained unstoppable momentum, realizing that principled action could overcome entrenched corporate power. Later that evening, alone with Patricia in the apartment, Christopher reflected on the journey. "Mom, I never imagined it would reach this scale so fast," he said, exhaustion mixing with elation. "Every challenge feels monumental, but the small wins remind me why this fight is worth it." Patricia smiled, squeezing his hand. "Baby, you were meant for this. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it, and you're showing the world how." Christopher Langston's flight to Geneva was uneasily quiet. The hum of the jet engines beneath him reminded him of how far the initiative had grown from a single pilot program in Boston to discussions of global health equity with the World Health Organization. He stared out the window, watching clouds drift over the Atlantic, reflecting on the weeks that had transformed his life. Every decision, every challenge had carried weight beyond his personal ambitions. Now, the stakes were truly international. Upon arrival, Dr. Tendai Mukamuri met him at the airport. The crisp air of Geneva carried a sense of urgency. "Christopher," Mukamuri said, "the World Health Organization is ready to integrate your AI diagnostic tool into refugee camps across Africa and Asia. But the question is not just technology, it is trust. Communities must believe in your solution, and local leadership must be empowered to sustain it." Christopher nodded, absorbing the gravity. He had built systems, but culture and belief could not be coded or programmed. Over the next week, they conducted meetings with global health directors, NGO leaders, and local medical professionals. Christopher presented detailed deployment strategies, highlighting the importance of mobile health applications, translation protocols, and culturally adapted AI interfaces. Yet, during one session, a senior official raised a critical question. "Mr. Langston, your tool is powerful, but scaling at this pace could risk oversight. How do you ensure quality without overwhelming local resources?" Christopher paused, aware that his answer would set the tone for the international rollout. "We will implement phased deployment, combine AI with hands-on local training, and continuously monitor outcomes. Equity must not be sacrificed for speed, but speed must not prevent justice." As the days progressed, media outlets caught wind of the initiative. Headlines praised the expansion, but also questioned Christopher's age and experience. A European news network ran a segment implying he was too young to lead such a massive program. Later, the segment went viral on social media, and Christopher faced online scrutiny from audiences unfamiliar with the depth of his work. He felt the tension between global responsibility and personal vulnerability, a challenge amplified by every tweet, comment, and opinion piece questioning his authority. Back in Boston, the domestic programs continued to evolve. Jerome and his engineering team had begun deploying AI systems to clinics in underserved rural areas. Meanwhile, Amara, the young girl from Nigeria, was now coordinating remotely with local educators to ensure her village could adopt digital learning alongside healthcare tools. Their stories, connected by Christopher's vision, demonstrated that equity was not bound by borders. Yet, each success also reminded him of those still waiting, those who remained unseen. During a particularly long night in Geneva, Christopher sat alone in his hotel room. The glow of his laptop illuminated his thoughtful face. He reviewed metrics from domestic programs. Early cancer detection rates had increased. Rural patients were receiving preventative care, but gaps remained. Emails from supporters and detractors flooded in simultaneously. Some celebrated the vision, others criticized the pace. He felt the weight of expectation pressing down, a pressure that had become physical and emotional. "Dr." Mukamuri knocked softly before entering. "Christopher, the field teams are ready, but I sense something else," he said, noting the tension in Christopher's posture. "You're carrying more than work. You are carrying the hopes of entire communities." Christopher exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "It's more than work. Every choice, every delay, every misstep feels like I am letting people down. I keep thinking about those like Jerome and Amara, people who trust us to act decisively." The following morning, the WHO hosted a global press briefing. Christopher stood before cameras representing dozens of countries. His voice was calm but unwavering. Healthcare equity is not charity. It is a right. Our approach combines technology, training, and local empowerment. Every community deserves access to the same quality of care, regardless of geography, wealth, or background. Today, we begin a new chapter, not just for the United States, but for the world. Reporters asked pointed questions, but Christopher's clarity and depth silenced skepticism. Yet, even amid professional triumph, personal challenges surfaced. Long hours and intense pressure began to affect his health. Sleep came in fragments, meals were skipped, brief moments with Patricia were consumed by phone calls and strategy sessions. One evening, she called him in Geneva, worry evident in her voice. "Christopher, I know the world depends on you, but you cannot pour from an empty cup. Rest is part of your responsibility." Christopher felt the weight of her words. For the first time, He acknowledged that his human limits did not diminish the movement they shaped it. While the global programs advanced, unexpected twists emerged. A private donor withdrew funding, citing concerns about international compliance. Simultaneously, an influential media commentator launched a campaign questioning Christopher's leadership. Yet, these challenges did not deter him. Instead, they became opportunities for transparency and education. Christopher released detailed reports, sharing methodologies, metrics, and cultural adaptation strategies with the public. This openness generated renewed support, including from unexpected allies, former critics inspired by his unwavering commitment. Meanwhile, stories from the field fueled his determination. In a rural clinic in Kenya, a young nurse wrote about detecting early-stage illnesses thanks to the AI tool. In a small village in India, a mother reported her child receiving life-saving treatment that would have been delayed without remote diagnostics. Each message, each success story, reminded Christopher why the fight for equity was worth every personal sacrifice. By the end of the second week, the Geneva Initiative had achieved significant milestones. Over 50 clinics had received full system integration, training programs were underway, and a scalable framework was established for ongoing evaluation. Dr. Mukamuri praised the progress, noting that the methodology could be a model for equitable healthcare deployment worldwide. Christopher felt a quiet pride not from recognition, but from the knowledge that lives were changing as a result of deliberate, principled action. Yet, the pressure of constant visibility and global scrutiny was relentless. One night, as he reviewed field reports, he paused on a message from Amara. "Mr. Langston, our village is learning. I passed my exams. I can now teach my younger sisters. You showed me that we all deserve a seat at the table." Christopher felt a profound connection, a reminder that equity was personal as much as systemic. Despite fatigue and criticism, these moments grounded him. The culmination of these weeks in Geneva left Christopher both exhausted and inspired. He realized that leadership in equity was not about control or accolades, it was about trust, courage, and persistence. The victories, setbacks, and human stories intertwined, forming a tapestry of impact that transcended any single individual. For Christopher, the journey was far from over. The stakes were global, the responsibility immense, but the potential to transform lives remained boundless. When Christopher Langston's flight landed back in Boston, the air felt heavier than when he had left. Geneva had been filled with cautious optimism, but America's climate was shifting. News headlines were divided. Some praised him as a pioneer bringing healthcare equity to the global stage. Others accused him of abandoning domestic priorities, claiming his focus abroad was evidence of arrogance or misplaced values. As he stepped off the plane, a small crowd of supporters waved signs, "Equity for all." Seat 1A, lives on. Yet, a cluster of protesters nearby shouted insults, holding placards that read, "Reverse racism" and "Merit, not melanin." Christopher's security team ushered him through quickly, but the chants echoed in his mind long after. Back at Reynolds Health Network headquarters, James Patterson greeted him with a strained smile. "Chris, we need to talk," James said, leading him into a private office. "Congressional hearings are heating up. Conservative representatives are questioning the funding allocations, and some of our corporate partners, what's left of them, are spreading narratives that your leadership is reckless." Christopher sank into a chair, exhaustion visible in his posture. "Of course they are," he murmured. "It's easier to attack me than to confront inequity." James hesitated before adding, "And there's more. Harvard Medical School is under pressure. Some alumni donors are threatening to pull contributions, saying you're politicizing medicine. The dean is standing firm, but the tension is real." That evening, Christopher returned to his apartment. Patricia was waiting with a warm meal and the comfort only a mother could provide. "Baby, you've been running at full speed," she said softly. "But storms don't mean you're off course. They mean you're making waves." He smiled faintly, her words grounding him in ways nothing else could. The next day at Harvard, the campus atmosphere was tense. Protesters had returned, louder and more aggressive than before. This time, however, the students were ready, led by Jasmine Williams and David Kim. Hundreds of medical students and faculty gathered in silent counter-demonstration. Wearing white coats and holding personal testimonies, first-generation doctor, immigrant success story, survivor of cancer, future oncologist. The power of collective identity drowned out the small group of detractors. Christopher walked through the crowd quietly, humbled by their solidarity. Inside, Dean Richardson convened a meeting with faculty and student leaders. "We stand with equity," he declared, "but symbolic gestures aren't enough. We need structural reforms." Christopher spoke next. "If we want medicine to look like the communities it serves, we must change how we admit, train, and support students. Blind admissions, preparatory programs, community partnerships. These aren't luxuries. They're necessities." The board debated, with predictable resistance from older members like Harrison. "You're moving too fast," he argued. "Rome wasn't built in a day." Christopher fixed him with a steady gaze. Rome was built on the backs of those unseen. How much longer should we ask them to wait? Another generation, another century. His voice carried the weariness of lived truth. Silence filled the room before Dr. Richardson spoke firmly. "The board has voted. Your proposals are approved, effective immediately." The announcement rippled across campus. Students erupted in applause, recognizing that this was more than policy, it was precedent. That evening, Christopher found himself surrounded by prospective medical students on a campus tour. A young Latina woman, Sophia Martinez, broke away from the group. "Mr. Langston," she said nervously. "I'm from the same neighborhood as Jerome. Your story. His story, it changed everything. My parents are helping me study for the MCAT. We call it the Seat 1A Fund." Christopher felt a lump in his throat. That's exactly what this is about. Not just my seat, but yours, and everyone who was told they don't belong. Meanwhile, the opposition outside Harvard grew more aggressive. Conservative commentators dedicated hours of airtime to painting Christopher as a radical threat to American values. Anonymous death threats multiplied, forcing the FBI to increase his security detail. Late one night, after a particularly vicious media segment, Christopher sat alone in his apartment, tempted to step away from public life. The weight of being both symbol and human was suffocating. His phone rang. It was Amara, calling from Nigeria. "Mr. Langston," she said, her voice steady despite her young age. "I passed my exams. I'm going to medical school in Lagos." My whole village celebrated. The elders who once said girls shouldn't be educated are now proud. You didn't just change American healthcare, you changed how the world sees what's possible. Another call came shortly after, this time from Jerome. His voice was filled with excitement. "Chris, I got the job. Lead engineer. They told me they're adopting a Reynolds redemption hiring model, looking for talent in unexpected places. You gave me my shot, and now I get to build for others." Messages poured in that night from patients saved by early diagnoses, from families in rural towns where clinics were opening, from students forming grassroots organizations in his name. Each story reminded Christopher that the movement was no longer his alone, it belonged to millions. The decision to continue was not about his comfort, but about their futures. The following week, Christopher testified before Congress once again. A hostile representative sneered, "Mr. Langston, isn't your movement just socialism dressed up as health care?" Christopher's reply was calm, pointed. "Congressman, you have enjoyed government-funded health care your entire career. You're asking me to defend providing the same quality of care to your constituents that you receive yourself. The only thing radical about that is that it hasn't happened already." The clip went viral, with millions sharing it under the tag "Healthcare Hypocrisy." By the end of the month, 3 congressmen who had previously opposed the Health Equity Act announced they were reconsidering their positions. Progress was slow, messy, and contested, but it was real. Back at Harvard, the cultural shift was undeniable. Applications from diverse backgrounds surged, pipeline programs flourished, and the phrase "Seat 1A" became shorthand for challenging exclusion wherever it appeared. Christopher walked across campus one evening, watching students of every background gather to study, debate, and dream together. Despite the noise of opposition, he knew something irreversible had begun. Still, the burden of leadership weighed heavily. Christopher often wrestled with doubt in the quiet moments. Was he strong enough to withstand relentless scrutiny? Could he remain human under the crushing expectations? His mother's words echoed each time. "Storms don't mean you're off course. They mean you're making waves." It began on a cold March morning in Boston. Christopher Langston awoke to the sound of chants outside his apartment window. At first, he thought it was another round of protesters, but when he drew back the curtain, what he saw left him speechless. Hundreds of healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, EMTs, technicians stood in the street, many wearing scrubs or white coats. Their signs were not of opposition, but solidarity. Healthcare is a human right. Equity can't wait. Seat 1A for all. Down on the sidewalk, Patricia Langston stood among them in her hospital uniform. She held a simple cardboard sign, "I rode 3 buses so my son could dream." When she spotted Christopher at the window, she lifted it high, her eyes shining with pride. The crowd began chanting his name, not as a celebrity, but as a symbol of their own struggles and hopes. Security moved to escort Christopher out the back, but he refused. He walked straight into the heart of the crowd, the chants swelling around him. A nurse stepped forward. "Mr. Langston, we're marching to Washington. We want you to lead us." Another added, "Every mile, more will join. By the time we reach D.C., we'll be too many to ignore." The idea spread like fire. Within hours, the march was organized with routes, supply stations, and support volunteers. They called it the Seat 1A March. Christopher hesitated, his mind racing with logistics, risks, and personal doubts, but Patricia took his hand. "Baby, this isn't just your march. It belongs to all of us. You don't have to carry it alone. Just walk." The first day, 1,000 people set out from Boston. By the end of the week, 10,000 marched through Connecticut and New York. Local communities greeted them with food, water, and shelter. Churches opened their doors. Schools let children join for a mile or two, and musicians played at rest stops. Every evening, Christopher spoke briefly to the crowd, reminding them why they walked. "We march because lives are lost every day to a system that values profit over people. We march because justice cannot wait for convenience. We march because healthcare is dignity." Media coverage exploded. Major networks sent crews to follow the march, while social media live streams spread the images globally. Aerial shots showed endless streams of white coats stretching along highways, a river of determination. Hashtags like Charge Seat 1A March and Equity in Motion trended for weeks. Critics dismissed it as performative, but the sheer scale of the movement silenced much of their skepticism. As they entered Philadelphia, the crowd swelled to over 100,000. Christopher, though exhausted, kept walking at the front. His shoes wore thin, his body ached, but he drew strength from those around him. Jerome marched beside him, no longer the invisible janitor, but now a recognized engineer leading teams of innovators. "Chris," Jerome said quietly, "this is bigger than anything Reynolds or Harvard ever imagined. You started something no one can stop." Amara joined via live stream from Lagos, her face projected on a giant screen during a rally. "In my village, we walk for water, for food, for survival," she said. "Now, we walk with you for equity, for dignity, for health." Our steps echo together. Her words drew tears even from hardened reporters covering the march. By the time they reached the outskirts of Washington, the march had swelled to over 1 million. The National Mall was filled with people in scrubs, lab coats, and everyday clothes, an ocean of humanity demanding change. Christopher stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where Dr. King had once spoken. The weight of history pressed on him, but so did the voices of the present, chanting in unison. He began slowly, his voice amplified across the vast crowd. "We stand here not as radicals, but as realists. We know that every day we delay equity, lives are lost. We know that zip codes should not determine life expectancy. We know that the color of your skin should not decide the quality of your care." He paused, letting the words settle. Scanning the crowd, he saw faces that had become part of his journey. Jerome in his white coat, Sophia Martinez holding a future doctor sign, Amara's image on banners, and even Margaret Reynolds standing with widows who had lost loved ones to preventable conditions. Patricia was beside him, her sign still simple, but now iconic. Christopher lifted his hands. William Reynolds died believing in redemption through justice. He left us resources not for charity, but for change. Today, we declare we are not asking for seats at old tables. We are building new tables in every community where everyone has a place. The response was thunderous, applause, chants, and tears rippled through the crowd. The noise lasted 10 minutes, a roar of solidarity that shook the Capitol. Reporters described it as the largest healthcare demonstration in American history. Inside the Capitol, lawmakers watched nervously from windows, realizing they could no longer dismiss the movement as fringe. Then Patricia stepped forward to speak. Her voice was not trained or polished, but it carried a clarity that pierced the noise. "They asked me about those 3 buses like it was special. But it wasn't. Millions of parents ride buses, make sacrifices, work long shifts, all so their children can dream of a better life. What if we built a world where no one had to choose between a paycheck and a doctor, where no mother had to see her child suffer because she couldn't afford care?" That's why we march. Her words, plain and profound, struck harder than any policy paper. Even seasoned politicians were seen wiping their eyes. By the end of the day, 17 senators announced new support for the Health Equity Act. That night, Christopher, Patricia, James Patterson, Jerome, Sophia, and Margaret Reynolds gathered in a small restaurant. They were exhausted but exhilarated. James leaned back, shaking his head. "I've seen movements come and go, Chris. But this is history." Christopher looked around the table, his heart full. History is only the beginning. Laws are just paper without implementation. Tomorrow, the real work begins. Margaret's voice was quiet but steady. William said once that he spent his life climbing ladders, never realizing he should have been building bridges. You're building those bridges now. Christopher. The march had ended, but its echoes filled Washington. Streets still carried the footprints of 1 million healthcare workers. Signs lingered in trash bins, slogans etched into memory. Seat 1A for all, equity can't wait. For Christopher Langston, the true fight had only begun. Congress was convening for final debates on the Health Equity Act, and the air was thick with tension. Inside the Capitol, polished hallways buzzed with staffers rushing to and fro. Christopher walked beside Patricia, who had been asked to testify again. She clutched her written statement with trembling hands. "Baby," she whispered, "I don't know if I can do this twice." Christopher squeezed her arm gently. "You don't need to be perfect. Mom, just be true. That's all you've ever been." The hearing room overflowed. Cameras lined the walls, reporters jotted furiously, and lawmakers prepared their talking points. The first hours were grueling. Opponents of the bill accused Christopher of pushing socialism, of endangering the economy, of creating dependency. One congressman sneered, "Mr. Langston, isn't this just a racial agenda wrapped in healthcare clothing?" Christopher's reply was steady, his voice calm but piercing. "Congressman, this is not about race. It's about reality. The reality that poor communities, rural towns, and families of every background are dying from preventable conditions. The reality that your constituents deserve the same care you receive with your government-funded insurance. If justice for all feels like a threat, perhaps the problem is not the policy, but the privilege." Gasps filled the room. Cameras captured the moment, and by evening, the clip had gone viral again. When Patricia took the stand, the tone shifted. She spoke softly, her words simple yet devastating. "I rode 3 buses every day to clean hospital floors. I worked those shifts so my son could dream bigger than I ever could, but dreams should not be rationed by wealth. Health care should not be a lottery ticket. I am here for every mother who rode her own buses, who watched her child get sick and couldn't afford a doctor." The silence after her testimony was more powerful than any applause. By the week's end, the Health Equity Act passed narrowly in both chambers. The victory was historic. The signing ceremony at the White House was broadcast nationwide. President Hayes handed the signing pen to Patricia, who held it as though it weighed more than gold. Christopher stood beside her, exhausted but proud, knowing this law was only the beginning. Yet, the passage of the act triggered a ferocious backlash. Conservative media labeled Christopher a radical CEO and affirmative action messiah. Death threats escalated. The FBI assigned him full-time security, and Harvard implemented new protocols just to protect students around him. At night, Christopher lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the adrenaline of victory colliding with the shadows of fear. One particularly brutal evening, a commentator devoted an entire segment to attacking him. They dismissed his achievements as lucky breaks and called him a danger to American values. Christopher switched off the television, feeling the words cut deeper than he expected. He sat alone in his apartment, thinking of walking away, of disappearing into the quiet life of a student doctor. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine quitting. His phone rang. It was Amara from Lagos. "Mr. Langston," she said excitedly. "I passed my exams. I'm going to medical school in Lagos." My whole village celebrated. The elders who once doubted me now call me doctor already. Christopher closed his eyes, her voice like a hand pulling him back from the edge. "You showed me that girls like me belong in medicine. If you stop now, what happens to the others watching minutes later?" Another call came. Jerome's voice was full of pride. "Chris, I got the job. Lead engineer at a firm that would never have looked at me before. They told me they're using the Reynolds redemption model for hiring. They said your story made them see talent differently. You gave me my shot, and now I'll give others theirs." Message after message poured in, patients treated, students inspired, families restored. Christopher realized the movement had outgrown him. It no longer depended on his stamina alone. It had become a chorus of voices demanding justice, and his role was not to carry it all, but to keep it honest and alive. Still, the toll on his body was evident. He had been sleeping 3 hours a night, balancing medical studies with advocacy. Professors noticed the strain. Sarah Kim pulled him aside one day after class. "Christopher," she said gently, "you can't save everyone if you destroy yourself in the process. Even revolutionaries need rest." Her words landed hard, a reminder that even heroes had limits. At night, Christopher grappled with conflicting emotions, pride in the progress, fear of the backlash, doubt in his endurance. In those quiet hours, he remembered his mother's steady wisdom storms don't mean you're lost, they mean you're making waves. But he also felt the fragility of being human under constant scrutiny. A week later, in a lecture hall filled with students, Christopher watched as Sophia Martinez stood up to share her story. "I'm from the same neighborhood as Jerome," she said, "because of the Seat 1A fund. I'm studying for the MCAT. My parents never believed this was possible, but now they do. Because of you, Mr. Langston." The students applauded, and Christopher felt the heaviness lift. If only for a moment. The law was passed. But the real fight was implementation. Christopher knew bureaucratic barriers, administrative delays, and corporate sabotage lay ahead. Yet, standing in that hall, surrounded by future doctors and nurses of every background, he felt a flicker of hope, strong enough to quiet the noise. 1 year after the first march, Christopher Langston found himself once again in an airport. The same terminal where his journey had begun felt strangely smaller now, though perhaps it was he who had grown. As he approached the Skylux lounge, he noticed a familiar face, the woman who had once demanded he leave his seat in first class. She froze, her face flushing with shame. "Mr. Langston," she stammered, "I owe you an apology. That day, I made assumptions that were wrong and harmful. I've thought about it every day since the video. I even started volunteering at a free clinic in my community. My daughter, she's applying to medical school now. She says she wants to be the kind of doctor who sees everyone." Christopher studied her for a moment, then offered a gentle smile. "We all make assumptions. What matters is what we do once we recognize them." She nodded gratefully, her relief evident. For Christopher, it was a reminder that redemption was possible, even in unexpected places. Boarding the plane, he slid into Seat 1A. No questions, no resistance, just quiet acknowledgement from the crew. As he settled, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored to have Mr. Christopher Langston aboard. For those who don't know, his courage on one of our flights sparked changes in how we treat all passengers. He reminded us that dignity has no class designation. Thank you, Mr. Langston, for making us better." Applause rippled through the cabin. Christopher felt embarrassed, but deeply moved. On the flight, he opened his laptop to review his upcoming presentation for the World Health Organization in Geneva. The screen displayed a glowing map of the world, each light representing a community where his AI diagnostic tool was now saving lives. Villages in Africa, towns in Asia, remote reservations in the U.S. Each dot was a reminder of why the struggle had been worth it. Messages poured in daily. Jerome sent photos of his engineering team, diverse and thriving. Sophia Martinez shared her acceptance letter to medical school. Amara called to say she had begun her first year in Lagos. Wearing a white coat, she said made her feel powerful and proud. Patricia, now something of a public figure herself, spoke regularly about her 3 buses testimony, helping families across the country believe that their sacrifices mattered. Despite the victories, Christopher remained human. Some nights, doubt still visited him. The threats had not disappeared, and neither had the critics. Yet, the stories of those touched by the movement drowned out the noise. He realized that the legacy of Seat 1A was not about him, but about the countless others now claiming their seats with confidence. In Washington, the Health Equity Act was being implemented with visible results. Clinics were opening in underserved areas, early detection rates soared, and medical school applications from diverse backgrounds reached historic highs. The phrase Seat 1A had entered the national vocabulary, shorthand for the fight against exclusion. People used it in schools, workplaces, and even family conversations. Take Your Seat 1A became a call to claim one's rightful place. At a conference in Atlanta, Christopher spoke before thousands of students. Seat 1A was never just about me. It was about every person told they didn't belong. It was about mothers riding buses, children denied care, brilliant minds overlooked. We cannot change the past, but we can build a future where dignity is the default, not the exception. The audience rose to their feet, many with tears in their eyes. Afterward, Christopher sat quietly with Patricia. She leaned over, touching his arm. "Baby, your father would be so proud. You didn't just claim your seat. You made sure others could claim theirs too. That's the greatest inheritance." Her words, simple and sincere, carried the weight of everything they had endured together. In the months that followed, Christopher learned to embrace rest as part of the work. He allowed himself evenings of quiet, dinners with his mother, walks through Boston without an agenda. He discovered that healing was not only for the communities he served, but for himself as well. At Reynolds Health Network, Margaret Reynolds helped launch a foundation in her late husband's name, dedicated to funding scholarships and clinics in marginalized communities. Jerome's Redemption Program became a national model for hiring talent from overlooked backgrounds. Sophia created a mentorship group for first-generation students. Amara began publishing articles on healthcare equity in Nigeria, already a leader in her own right. Christopher's story became a case study in medical schools, business programs, and leadership seminars. But when asked how he wanted to be remembered, he always said the same thing as someone who built bridges: nothing more, nothing less. On a quiet evening in Boston, Christopher returned to the church where Patricia still sang in the choir. As he sat in the pews, listening to her voice rise in harmony, he felt the weight of the past years lift. For the first time, he allowed himself to exhale fully. He realized the fight would never truly end, but neither would the hope. Looking back at all that had unfolded, Christopher understood the essence of the journey. Seat 1A had started as a place denied, but became a symbol of belonging. And in that belonging, millions found the courage to stand, to speak, to build. The story was never about a seat on an airplane. It was about the truth that dignity has no class designation, that every person deserves a place, and that justice delayed is humanity denied. As the choir swelled and Patricia's voice rang clear, Christopher bowed his head. For all the battles fought and the battles still to come, he felt peace in knowing that the legacy of Seat 1A would outlive him, woven into the lives of those who believed, finally, that they belonged. The story of Christopher Langston reminds us that dignity is not something granted, it is something we already own. Life will place us in moments where others try to define our worth by our background, our income, or even the color of our skin. But Christopher's journey shows that strength comes from knowing who you are, even when the world doubts you. For older generations especially, this story resonates deeply. Many of us have faced moments of sacrifice, working long hours, riding buses, giving up our own comfort so that our children could sit in a better seat than we did. It reminds us that those sacrifices were not in vain. Each small act of perseverance, each refusal to give up, becomes part of a much larger story of progress. The lesson is simple yet profound. Never let anyone convince you that you don't belong at the table, in the room, or even in seat 1A. And when life gives you the chance, build bridges for others so they, too, can sit where they deserve. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Your support means the world. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel together. We can keep spreading stories of dignity, justice, and hope.